So we've got some developments in the nationwide fight over the ATF's pistol brace rule. The rule is now gone, it's been vacated nationwide, and as a result, most of the lawsuits against the brace rule have now been dismissed as moot. But now, in one of the last remaining cases, the DOJ continues to make statements that they may still be enforcing some of the underlying legal theories that essentially brace pistols are in fact still SBRs. And more importantly, they're openly admitting that nothing changed even after the rule was struck down nationwide. Now, recently, we talked about how the White House itself made statements involving pistol brace rules, adding another layer to this entire situation, and this all comes as the case is now pending for a new court ruling because all of the official briefs have been filed. So let's break down what is now happening in this critical case. Now, before we jump into this video, if you want to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is simply to subscribe. Also, you can hit the like button that just tells the algorithm that you appreciate this content, and so it shares it with more people. So if you've been following the channel for a while, you will know that this fight involving the pistol brace rule really started with the Biden administration and them passing that rule. That rule claimed that most brace pistols were actually short-barreled rifles for the purposes of the NFA. Now, in response to that, multiple lawsuits were filed, and eventually, in one of the cases, the mock challenge, Judge Reed O'Connor struck down the rule entirely with a nationwide vacatur of the rule. Now, in response to that, the Biden DOJ at the time appealed that ruling up to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. But after the administration changed over, the Trump DOJ decided to drop the appeal and conceded the case. That meant that the pistol brace rule was officially struck down nationwide. Now, after that happened, most of the remaining pistol brace challenges, those lawsuits were eventually dismissed and settled, and some were settled and some were dismissed as moot because the ATF agreed that that rule was now, vacated and it no longer existed. Now, currently there is one last remaining big case against the pistol brace rule, which is the GOA and State of Texas lawsuit. And like I mentioned, that is kind of one of the last major challenges that's currently standing. Now, in that case, there has been some new developments which have raised some very serious red flags on whether it was actually a good idea for some of these other cases to be dismissed as moot, and maybe it was the ATF and the DOJ's plan all along to dismiss those cases, say that the rule is dead, but still potentially try to, put in place these restrictions on brace pistols as SBRs just using the different legal theory. Now, in the GOA case, GOA in Texas are asking the court for something a little bit different from some of these other challenges. They are now asking the court to recognize that the brace rule is gone, but also they're asking the court to issue a permanent injunction blocking the ATF from enforcing its underlying legal theory. That legal theory that the ATF still holds is that brace pistols can be treated as short-barreled rifles under the NFA based purely on the statutory interpretation alone. In other words, GOA is trying to stop the ATF from saying, we're not enforcing the brace rule itself anymore, but we still believe that brace pistols are SBRs under the text and statute itself. This case is designed to prevent any current or future administration from reviving pistol brace restrictions without actually passing a new rule and just doing it based on the statutory text. But now we also have the DOJ who has made a very clear statement on this issue in this case with some of their new briefs. The DOJ filed a response arguing that the case should be dismissed, and in that filing, they made a statement that is incredibly important. They said that even though the pistol brace rule has been vacated, they are still enforcing the NFA and GCA against certain braced pistols. And then they explained that this shouldn't come as a shock or surprise to anyone because even if the rule was struck down, that never changed anyone's underlying statutory obligations. Now, here's where things are taking an interesting turn, also based on the position that the DOJ has taken in this case itself, and now some statements that we've received from the White House. Because at the same time, the DOJ is making those arguments here in this case about some brace pistols still being SBRs and there being regulations on them, you have the White House that has released a new budget proposal, and it directly addresses this pistol brace issue. In that budget, the administration explicitly talks about moving away from prior firearms regulations that effectively criminalize law-abiding gun ownership, and it specifically references things like pistol brace regulations, restrictions on homemade firearms, and other regulatory actions tied to the ATF. The budget even states that prior policies subjected gun owners to serious criminal penalties over things like pistol braces, and now the administration is signaling, or at least saying through this budget and some of these statements, that they're going to shift away from those types of enforcement approaches. So now we have two things happening at the same time. On the one hand, the DOJ is in court saying nothing has changed at all. They argue that even without the rule itself, people could still be prosecuted under the statute's legal theory and under the text itself. But on the other hand, you have the White House with the DOJ budget essentially signaling some sort of policy shift, at least is what they're saying, moving away from these types of regulations and saying, they're not going to target braced pistols anymore like the prior administration. That creates this tension because it suggests that politically there may be a move away from aggressive brace enforcement, but legally the government is still, at least in this case and in their current briefs, preserving the ability to enforce it going forward. The DOJ is saying that the brace rule itself did not create this restriction, but the statute did, and the text alone in this legal theory is the basis for restrictions on braced pistols. And they say that even if you eliminate the rule, you still have liability under the statutory text. But the budget is now signaling that the government may not want to pursue those cases. Essentially, they don't want to do that going forward. At least maybe that's what they're saying. Now we have some conflicting actions and also statements from the DOJ where you had the White House in this budget say they weren't going to go after things like frames and receivers and loose those, restrictions. But then you have the DOJ, coming out with new policies as well involving that. So on one side, you have, the White House making a statement saying that we're going to protect the Second Amendment, but in practice, the DOJ on the other side is still engaging in some restrictions. And this actually reinforces why the GOA case is so very important, because GOA is not relying on policy promises. They're asking for a binding court order. They want the court to say that the ATF cannot enforce this interpretation at all. Because without that, even if the current administration backs off, a future administration could come back and enforce the same rule or try to do the same restrictions using that legal theory that's been left out there. So this case is now in the final stages of the district court review. As I mentioned, the DOJ moved to dismiss this case as moot like they did with some of these other cases, and the plaintiffs are currently trying to prevent that from happening. If this case is thrown out, that means that one of the last remaining pistol brace challenges is now gone. That would leave the door open for the administration to implement some sort of brace restrictions based on their legal theory alone. But of course, if something like that happens, a new challenge can be filed, but then you have to kind of go through the whole process once again, the whole legal battle all over. So the judge in this case has set the briefing deadlines for this battle over the whole mootness question, and now all of those papers have officially been filed. So now we're going to wait and see and watch carefully to see, what happens and what does the judge say in this case. Personally, I think that there is a strong chance that the court may dismiss this case as moot, but we're going to have to wait and see what happens based on the arguments that were filed to the court. So that's where things currently stand right now in this critical pistol brace challenge. The formal brace rule has been struck down nationwide. The DOJ says that enforcement can potentially still happen anyway, but now you have the White House signaling that they're going to move away from these restrictions, but maybe in practice, that's not actually what's happening, also based on what the DOJ is arguing in this case. And that leaves one major question for this court here to decide in this case. Is this issue actually resolved, or is it just being handled differently depending on who is in power? And, is this issue still out there? Is the administration potentially still going to restrict braced pistols? So that's what's currently going on in this critical challenge. As we get more information as it develops, I will let you guys know. If you like this video and you'd like to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is simply to like, comment, and subscribe. But as always, thank you so much for all of your support. And never forget, this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.